Hey friends, welcome to the Kids Ministry Circle podcast. Kids Ministry Circle is a community for kids ministry leaders to be encouraged and equipped to love and serve the local church. I'm your host, Lauren Jackson, and today's episode is all about church planting, but also all about volunteers, having parents serve in your ministry, how to encourage your parents to practice at-home discipleship with their kids. It is a jam-packed episode with my friend, Lexi Bartlett. I met Lexi a couple years ago when she jumped into the Kids Ministry Circle cohort, and it has been so fun to get to know her over the years. And she is full of tips and tricks for all of those church planting staff members who have moved buildings, are moving buildings, are moving into new setup and tear down buildings. She just had so much wisdom. And then I can't forget, she talks about how so many of her parents serve in her ministry and the unique way that they cast vision to invite parents to serve. This often can be a tough conversation to have, one that is tricky amongst ministry leaders. But I think what Lexi is doing at her church is working well, and it might give you some ideas or some language or some inspiration on how you can continue to partner with parents and encourage them to help lead on a Sunday morning. Now, before I jump into my conversation with Lexi, I have the most fun announcement. I love making this announcement, but our spring cohort is right around the corner. Yes, I know. Can you believe it? 2024 is only weeks away, and our spring cohort is going to kick off at the very end of February, beginning of March, and now's the time to pre-register. We love to give our podcast listeners first access to register, and so we have created this pre-registration process. And if you don't know, our Kids Ministry Circle cohorts is 9 weeks of group coaching, or what I like to call a virtual table for kids ministry leaders to build community with other kids ministry leaders, share ideas, gain new perspectives, grow in their leadership gifting, and feel less alone in ministry. We cannot wait for our spring cohort to be filled with new leaders, new ideas, and new perspectives. So pre-registration is really important because our cohorts always sell out. So if you want to reserve your spot, you can jump over to kidsministrycircle.com/spring cohort to pre-register. Now on to my conversation with Lexi. Lexi, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
I am so excited that you're here. I was just trying to figure it out. We met, I don't know, probably 2 years ago. You jumped into one of maybe the first Kids Ministry Circle cohorts, and it was so fun to meet you. And then as we have chatted back and forth, we've had like so many random connections between the pastors of our churches, our friends, and, my sister-in-law. So all of these weird connections, which make it so fun and just, it's such a small world. So it's been a long time coming to have you on the podcast, and I'm so excited that you're here. Why don't you kind of kick off our episode by talking a little bit about yourself, tell us about who you are and kind of how you got started in kids ministry, and then maybe where you're currently serving.
Yeah. So my name is Lexi Bartlett. I am the kids minister at Mosaic Church in Richardson, Texas. And I've been married to my husband for almost a year. And so I have a sweet stepdaughter, Finley, who is 5. And then we are expecting a baby girl in April. Kind of how I got started in kids ministry is a little bit of a long story, but I grew up in the church. I saw my mom serve in kids ministry, so that was definitely modeled for me. And I've always loved kids. And so kind of found myself serving in middle school and high school. And then in college, I got involved with a ministry called Young Life and eventually went on Young Life staff here in Richardson and was kind of doing 2 different ministries within that. So Wildlife, which was for junior high kids, and then Young Lives for teen mamas. And so that was a lot together to lead 2 different ministries that are very different from each other. And so I decided to step back and just do part-time staff doing Young Lives, which meant I needed another job because I could not sustain on a part-time ministry salary. And right around that time, the Lord is so good. Our lead pastor was kind of preparing to launch our church. And so we got in contact with one another. And again, I had always loved kids, loved the local church, and saw that like even just from a young age. And so never had really considered being in vocational ministry, and then found myself in it. And yeah, was super excited to jump on board to be a part of launching Mosaic and our kids ministry. And then, so I started out on part-time staff, and then eventually came on full time. So I've been at Mosaic for 5 years, and it has been such a joy.
Yay. That's so awesome. Part of the reason that I wanted you to jump on the podcast today was there's a lot of reasons, but one of them was kind of this church planting world that you currently serve in. You've been at Mosaic since the beginning, and church planting is hard. And we actually have gotten a lot of feedback from podcast listeners of like, we want to hear more from the people who are in the church planting world, who are in it, who are trying to figure it out. And that's partially why I wanted you to jump on the podcast, but also kind of this dynamic of church planting. Also, oftentimes in a church planting environment, there's more kids than adults. And you're like, this is crazy. Everybody has so many kids. And there's a lot that kind of gets put on the parents. And I know a lot of your heart is family discipleship. And what does that look like for parents who are serving in your ministry? So there's a lot that we're going to cover in this episode. So I want to like dive right in. But talk to us kind of about your experience in the church planting world. What has been maybe some of the hardest moments, but also what have been some of the sweetest moments in kind of your church planting experience at Mosaic?
Yeah. So we launched back in fall of 2018. So like I said, we just celebrated 5 years as a church. And we do not own a building and have never owned a building. And so we have actually moved buildings. We will move buildings in January, which will be our 5th building move as a church, 4th for kids-wise, because there's a little short stint in there where we didn't have kids meeting during COVID. So that just poses its own challenges, not owning a building, not having our own space, but also moving to different spaces. So considering the space, what its needs are, and adapting. And that is really hard in a lot of ways, just to not own your own space, never know what you're walking into on a Sunday morning. And also just hard to lead volunteers in that sense too, just because things are constantly changing for them. So in a world where I wish I could give a lot of consistency, sometimes that's just not doable based on our limitations presented by the building. And then there's also, space limitations or storage limitations, things like that. So that has been something that's been difficult, but it has also been really sweet to see our people just come alongside me and our team and our whole church body to really serve us. So I just think back to the beginning where we had a load crew who got there early. These men, they were scheduled and they would bring their trucks and hook it up to the trailer and carry everything out, everything from production to signage to all of our kids' stuff. And then it's a lot of our volunteers setting up and tearing down every Sunday. And so it has just been really sweet to see our people step in to be unified for this common goal of getting to gather together and just like them understanding the importance of the gathering Sunday morning and being willing to sacrifice. Most of our people are parents with a lot of littles. And so for them to show up and do the hard work was just really sweet to see. I will say some other hard things is just volunteers. I think we'll get a little bit more towards it at the end, but because our church is so young and a lot of the people are parents with young kids, we have a kind of unique volunteer serving model just based on some of our limitations and things like that. It's what we have to use. It's not perfect. There are definitely some pros, definitely some cons to it. But that can be really difficult. Just how do you engage volunteers, encourage them, equip them to serve, knowing that they themselves are parents with little kids. And so it is often hard at times. And then obviously COVID was some hard moments. I know it was for everyone. And so, there were some really sweet things there to just getting to see parents lead their kids in family worship and family discipleship at home. And then just coming back from that, it was a slow process and over time, but it was sweet to see kids again in person and families, and then just see how they've grown and changed. And there's some harder changes because of COVID. Like we just saw some behavior things, or just even literacy rates have been something that's been a challenge for us, just as we consider curriculum and things like that. But has also been really sweet to see people come back and realize, hey, I can do this family discipleship thing. I was kind of forced to do it at home during COVID. And so now I feel like I can do it. Or seeing families choose like, hey, we really enjoyed worshiping together as a family. And so we're going to encourage that as a church body as well. So we just always say like, hey, we have Mosaic Kids for those that need some age appropriate just instruction and gospel-centered curriculum for kids in a fun and engaging way. But also, like, your kids being in service with you is awesome. Like, for them to sit with their parents and watch them worship, and they can still hear truth. I think, underestimate a lot of times what kids can pick up. And so that was just something really sweet that we've seen kind of post-COVID, is just like this mixture, and it doesn't have to look the same for everyone. But as long as, the gospel is being proclaimed and God is getting the glory, like, it is all good. So those have been some hard things.
Yes.
Just also some sweet things over the course of 5 years is obviously seeing kids profess faith and being baptized. I don't think I will get tired of that. That has just been really, really sweet to see. And then kids growing in general. I mean, we talk often as a staff, those of us who have been there since the beginning, of like, man, you look at kids and you're like, I can't believe they're going to be 13 or whatever. They were.
I know. That's crazy.
Whatever. So seeing them grow physically, but also emotionally, mentally, and obviously spiritually has been a really sweet thing. And then just in general, are people using their gifts and talents? I think we have been blessed immensely with a lot of people with a lot of different gifts and talents, things like worship to just a unique amount of people at our church who have giftings or experience with those with special needs. And like, that's a huge blessing and gift to our church. And even people with administrative gifts. And it's just been really sweet to see people use those to bless our body. So that's not necessarily kids ministry specific, but there are some overlap in things there. So
for sure. I think the way that you just answered that question is such a good example of balancing and holding the tension of like, it's hard and good. And even just the way that you like described it, you were like, oh, well, this is hard, but this is good, but this is hard, but this is good. And it's just like this reminder for those in ministry, church planting or not, there are hard moments, but then there are really sweet moments, and it can go from one day to another or 1 hour to another. And you just kind of hold both of them. And I would love to jump back to one of the first things you talked about was your building and how you guys have moved over and over again. And you kind of said this maybe desire of like, man, I want to offer more consistency to our volunteers. And in the moments where you announce we're moving again, or this is changing, or this is changing, what does it look like for you? And then maybe for your whole staff to really kind of keep that morale up for volunteers. Like when it can be really easy to get down and frustrated and just like, oh man, we have to move again, or we have to change this, or this is happening. And it's just like, how do you kind of really encourage your volunteers and keep that morale up as they're serving and as they're sacrificing their time for your ministry, for kids, but also for the whole church?
Yeah, I think one is just that a building move in general, at least for us, has always been because it provides something better for the most part. So in this case, this upcoming move is providing more space, and it's a longer lease for us. So we will be able to be there for a longer time, Lord willing. And so I think just being first and foremost, be able to frame that for our people, and really like, it is exciting in a lot of ways. There'll be hard things, but really to take this opportunity to catalyze our volunteers for this move. And so Some of what that looks like is just being able to be proactive in communication to our volunteers of what that will look like in terms of when they'll serve, what it'll look like on our end, being as prepared as possible to do the hard work of visiting the space, seeing what we need, what is going to work, what can we provide here that is maybe different than the other space that would provide more consistency, more clarity, just be more helpful in general for our volunteers. And then just always, I think, in really everything for people, having the why behind the what is always important. And so as much as we can to put in front of them why we are doing what we are doing, which is obviously to share the gospel and to proclaim to the next generation. And so if we can keep that in mind, then it puts all the other hard things in perspective. So it's like, if you can just remember that we are gathering together to share the good news of the gospel with these kids. It might not be perfect. It might actually even be a little hard, but it is worth it for kids to hear the gospel. That's why we're here. It's what we want. It's what we desires for our kids to become resilient disciples. And so I think just reminding them of that as often as we can, because we can lose sight of it, and they can lose sight of it amidst the hard days, the hard Sundays. So
yeah, that's such a good reminder, because it's true. Like, even amidst the change and the hard and the pivoting and all these things, like reminding your volunteers over and over again, okay, yes, this may be hard for a season or maybe hard for a long time. And there may be things that are broken or things that need fixed or whatever the situation may be, but reminding them of like, hey, this is why we get to do this. And also, I think I loved what you say about focusing on the good things. Like, yes, moving everything is hard, and figuring out a new safety system for a new building is hard, but look at the good things. Like, we get to maybe grow in this new space and we get to be here longer. And so it's like focusing on God's faithfulness and God's goodness in a situation over focusing on what may be a hurdle. So I would love to know from your perspective, for those listening who are either moving into a new building or maybe they're transitioning into a set up and tear down situation, or maybe they're a new church plant, what are some of your like favorite things in terms of like set up and tear down? What are some things that you would tell people who are in a similar position of like, do this, maybe you need to buy this, maybe here's like a my favorite tool or something to help us in the setup and tear down and moving rooms and being in temporary space? What would be some of your favorite hacks maybe?
Yeah. First and foremost, I would say gather people around you to help you. You need a team of people. You can't do it alone. I hate asking for help. It's something, an area I've had to grow in, is asking for help. And so you need people, whether that's people to come with you to see a new space. I feel like I brought so many people with me to see this new space just
That's
because
such a good idea.
More eyes means more visibility on it. Something I'm not going to see, someone else is hopefully going to see. And so you need that. You need different people with different giftings. And you just need physical bodies to help you. Some of the practical things, we have had different kind of storage solutions over the course of our moves based on the building, what we were able to. But kind of initially, and this was not my idea, this was our lead pastor. He found this and it was just kind of gifted to me. We've since moved away from it, but it is still really good, is suitcases. So if you are very mobile, you just put everything that a classroom needs into a suitcase as much as you can. And Amazon has some really great, cheap ones that roll really well.
Yeah.
Just the Amazon basic ones. And that's what we used for the first probably 3 years. We had either a suitcase or multiple for basically everything. For every classroom, we had it for our printers. So they're on wheels. And so you just roll it back.
That is so funny, but also brilliant at the same time. I'm like picturing like back in my setup and tear down days, I'm like, I should have just had a suitcase instead of like carrying all these like tubs around.
Yes.
Just to like wheel a suitcase in and out. That's so smart.
Yeah. So that is one thing. There are other things on wheels that might work better for you. Like now we have in the building we're currently in, we have the opportunity to leave some things in classrooms. And so we have big black hefty bins, the ones on wheels, like maybe you see like you store things in a garage or whatever, but they're on wheels. They have a handle. It's a little clunky just because the handle's not super long. So I feel like you like kick your heels every time you roll, but they are on wheels. You can kind of get more in it. And so that's what we use for that. So those are kind of like the two big kind of like storage hacks. Think about what you can wheel in, wheel out. And make it as easy as possible on yourself.
Yeah.
For a lot of storage solutions. So kind of.
That's good. Those are good tips. We'll link to some of those Amazon basic suitcases in the show notes. So if people are like, I need to get some of those, they can snag that link from you. And then I would love to know kind of, you've been in a lot of shared spaces. Mm-hmm. How have you navigated the relationship between the people who own the space that you're in and you who are renting the space? What has that dynamic looked like over the years in all of your building situations?
Yeah, so it's been a variety. I feel like the first place we were in, there was definitely less contact, well, me personally with it. It was kind of more our lead pastor with the contact. It was through the school district. It was their professional development building. So they were a little bit more hands-off on Sunday mornings. We just had someone on the custodial staff present there, but we talked and communicated with someone totally different. And so that was very minimal communication. There was some kind of back and forth between some closet space and things like that. So, that was pretty minimal. And then the next space we were in was a school, although we didn't use all the school classrooms. And so, again, I didn't have as much contact with the people. It was more just like our administrator kind of contacting them. But it was a lot of just on our side, making sure that the space was put back to how it was found and things like that. We couldn't keep things in classrooms. So it was just everything loaded in and then loaded out. And so just making sure things were clean. In our current space, we get to have some things in classrooms, which is very nice. And so it's a lot of labeling our own stuff. And again, making sure we put things back. If it's anything that is theirs that we use, or just like making sure the classroom looks like it was when we got there. At our new space, it's a little bit unique in that we will use, the classrooms we will use for our preschool is a daycare during the week. And so I've already been in contact with the preschool director. And so that the communication I'm headed into will be a lot more just in terms of they use it throughout the week, every day for kids things. And the kids' classrooms are definitely more set up or conducive to kids, which is really exciting for us. But it means we will utilize a lot more of the space that is there and the things that are in there. And so I just wanted to be proactive in that by calling him and meeting him and establishing a relationship on the front end, even before we move, to let him know my hopes and desires of like, hey, I want this to be fruitful for both of us. We want to respect your stuff. We want to put it back where it needs to go, but I also want it to be a good thing for us. So what can we use? What can we not use? What's our system for cleaning? That kind of thing. And just really told him like, hey, I want there to be open lines of communication. So if you see things that aren't put back or that aren't done properly, like, please let me know so I can address it. And then kind of on the flip side, I want to be able to come to him if there are things that I notice or see. And so I'm really excited and hopeful. I had a few conversations with him already. And he has been very kind. He'll come a few Sundays in January just to see how things roll for us. So he can
that's awesome.
Best serve us. So yeah.
That's great. That's so exciting. I think there's been like a theme of what you've said recently of just being proactive in terms of like volunteer communication being proactive and over communicating and communicating often when things are changing, how things are going, like just that having that flow of communication. And even with these buildings of like you stepping into a new space and saying, hey, I'm just going to be proactive and reach out and try and get ahead of some of this so that on the back end, it doesn't mess up or like make it harder when we're trying to kind of take steps backwards. And so I think that's a good reminder of this kind of circumstance, church planting or not church planting, of just this. I say this a lot to kids ministry leaders of just think proactively. Like you often know how your volunteers will react to a certain situation, and you know kind of what you're going to come up against when you're in a new space, or maybe you're using space that is often used by somebody else. I think this circumstance goes a lot for if churches are in their own building, but they're hosting a preschool. The same thing applies. Just be proactive in your communication and just try and work really hard on building those open lines so that if they see something, if a volunteer hears something, or they have a question, like it's just having those open lines of communication can oftentimes really keep assumptions from happening, or like, well, I'm going to make up this story in my head because I think that this, I think they did this, I think this is happening. And then it's just not a good experience. Yeah. And so I'm like, if you can be proactive in all sorts of relationships and building those relationships, that's going to help you as you navigate the ups and downs of church planting world. Okay, so I do want to shift gears a little bit because you mentioned this at the beginning. You have a lot of parents who serve, and that's a big need for you. And this can sometimes be a interesting conversation around the kids ministry world, because some people are like, we require our parents to serve. Some people are like, we don't require our parents to serve. We don't want our parents to serve. It's just this weird conversation of like, what are people doing with parents? And I would love to know how you guys are navigating that. How are you navigating inviting your parents to serve? And maybe kind of give us that sneak peek into that unique volunteer system that you guys have in place.
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, I just want to start off by saying what you hit on, but to anyone listening, like this is specific to my church and my context and my place. So what works for us might not work for you, or might not make sense for you. And our model isn't perfect. Like I said before, there are some pros to it. There are also some cons, and we just have to weigh those. There's not going to be a perfect system. But again, this is just what works for us in our particular context. And so we have one service. And so that in of itself gives us some limitations, which means we cannot have one group of people serve every Sunday. Otherwise, they would never attend the corporate gathering. And so because of that, we have 4 different teams of volunteers. We mirror that in all of our other volunteer teams with worship and hospitality and production. All of those have a 4-week rotation as well. And so people for us, our volunteers serve once a month. And so kind of as Lauren mentioned, I did earlier, we have a large population of our church is young families. And so majority of our people have kids and multiple kids ranging from kind of birth to elementary. We don't have a lot of families who have kids and youth right now. That will come. It will probably blow up really soon. But most of our people have young kiddos. And so we ask that they would serve if they're checking their kids into Mosaic Kids. So it's kind of shifted a little bit over the course of the years. Obviously, when we launched, we basically required everyone who was a member at Mosaic to serve unless there was a medical or like legal reason prohibiting it. We also had some unique cases where we had some people in worship or production that that needed to be prioritized and stuff. But basically everyone served in kids ministry. And that was something that was expected and also modeled, I would say, from the top down. So all of our non-vocational elders served in kids. And so it wasn't just something that I was as a staff or that our elder team was asking of people to do and not doing themselves. They themselves were doing it. So as much as possible, if you have whatever model you choose, if your leadership from the top down can be on board, not saying they have to all serve, but if they are also championing kids ministry, that will be a huge help if it's just not the kids minister. And so COVID kind of altered a lot of that just based on when people decided to come back, what level of comfortability they were in, things like that. But since kind of now being a little bit past somewhat of the COVID era, we still ask our people to serve, to really consider it. So it's not necessarily a requirement, but it is highly encouraged.
A big ask.
if you are placing your children in Mosaic Kids, that you are serving. And so again, part of that is just based on our need. We have a lot of kids, and because we can only have people serve once a month to prioritize them also attending worship, we have to have a huge volunteer pool. And so I do really think that it is a benefit to our people in a lot of ways. One, it offers an opportunity for family discipleship. There's a lot of overlap there. And I can talk a little bit later of how we try and overlap some of those things to benefit parents so that they feel equipped to go back into their homes and disciple their kids there because they've seen it modeled in Mosaic Kids and they've participated in it in Mosaic Kids, kind of in a environment that is a little bit more controlled or given a schedule and material or whatever. I also think it's hospitable to our people. You know, it is a body coming together to serve one another, not just members, but also our community, those that are coming in. It offers the ability to have Mosaic Kids and welcome new people in and for their kids to hear the gospel. And obviously, again, just we want to be a place where kids hear the gospel. So we need people to serve so we can do that. And so putting that vision in front of people is huge. It's just reminding them of the why we are doing this. I think I can get a little bit on a hobby horse with this because I just really value serving kids ministry. And I think a lot of times in the Western church, and then in our context specifically being in North Texas, kind of the Bible Belt, we get a little bit comfortable where it's like, oh, we can just go to church and attend. And there are seasons for that and times for that. And I understand, but there is also this element of being a church and being a part of a church where you are serving. And so I just really do not like the language of childcare in kids ministry. And so I try as much as possible to stay away from that and kindly point our people to, hey, it's not childcare. Like, yes, there's an element of caring for kids within this, but it is way more than that. It is discipling our kids and sharing the gospel with them. And also it is an opportunity for people to serve, and service isn't just service is also worship. And so I think our people often think, hey, by me serving in Mosaic Kids this Sunday, I'm missing out on something. I'm missing out on the worship, which I'm not saying neglect the worship gathering. We're going to prioritize that. That is important, but also there is something unique about this that is also glorifying to the Lord, and you can still receive, fruit from serving. So
that's awesome. No, that's great. I would love to know, you mentioned this a little bit of just the leadership. And I think that was really important for people to hear of no, this is not just me pushing this agenda. And this is not just you kind of leading the charge, but really it is a leadership decision. And some of my sweetest moments in ministry have been serving alongside staff wives or elders who are not in vocational ministry and that they love it. I know that we've got some elders at our church who serve faithfully in students, not because they have to, but because they love to and they see a need for it. And so that is just really sweet. But sometimes people may be listening who are like, how do I get my people on board? They're they see the value behind it and they need volunteers and they want that to be the culture of their ministry. And you may not have a good answer for this because sometimes some lead pastors just from the beginning are just this is a value of ours and we're going to do this. And some are not wired like that, and that's okay. But I would love to know, how do you communicate this vision? Like maybe you have a new family that maybe have been coming for maybe like 3 to 6 months, who are consistent, who are showing up, dropping their kids off. What does that process look like to then go to them and say, hey, this is our vision for kids ministry. Would you consider joining our volunteer team? How does that get communicated?
Yeah, it's a great question. One, I would just say like we put it's every week in our newsletter, as simple as that sounds, but it's like, hey, here's a little blurb about Mosaic Kids. And like also it just says something of like, basically, would you consider, if you're checking your kids into Mosaic Kids, to serve? And it has a link to fill out a volunteer form. So that's very simple and it's easy. I don't ever think about it because I don't send out that newsletter. Our team administration does. And so I just am like, hey, that's something simple that is kind of off my radar, if you will, that is out there, but it's communicated. For like that family in particular, often those people would have probably attended what we call one of our like second Sundays, which is just a general thing for church people around the church who have been attending for a little bit, who want to know more about Mosaic. So it's kind of a step before attending membership class.
Yeah. Okay.
So that is not led by me. That is led by our connections minister. And there's usually an pastor elder there as well. And I try to swing by after cleanup and tear down and that kind of thing, at least to say hi. And so they also make it very clear, like, hey, if for anyone there who has kids and is asking questions about kids ministry, like this is what it looks like. And like, yeah, would you please consider stepping into serving? Obviously, we don't want to push them if it's like their second week coming or first week or whatever. Right. But if they have been attending a while and feel that they will land here at Mosaic, we want to get them plugged in there. And so that's another kind of plug. I just mentioned membership class. So for those of our people who are going through membership class, our lead pastor talks about the importance of serving. And we actually have them fill out right then a workflow to be sent, background check and ministry safe training. Part of that is to get them started in that process, just kind of as an initial, but also just for us, safety-wise, considering the amount of children we have around at our church, we just want to have as many people background checked and ministry safe trained as possible, even if they won't progress through the rest of the kids process. But it also is just a little start for them. Hey, if you've already done these steps.
Yes. And oftentimes those are the hardest things to do.
Yes.
Is they take the longest. And so I like that idea of just doing it from the beginning.
Yeah, they just are asked to do it from the beginning. And then from there, if it needs to be a personal conversation, so if there's people have been around a while, it's, me reaching out to them and just asking like, hey, you want to grab coffee and meet up? And so we can talk about just any of their questions. I can listen to what questions or comments or concerns they have about kids ministry in general, but also with the hopes of eventually encouraging them to jump in. And again, not to just jump in to fill a number, but like really casting the vision of why we have parents serve. Like, yes, it is a need, but also there is some value and reason behind parents serving, which we really believe in and value. And so, and then other than that, like I said, we've just from the beginning kind of had our elders and pastors championing kids ministry. And so they'll be, if we are needing more volunteers, they are some of the first to say like, hey, if we need to make an announcement or talk about it at a member meeting, like, let's do that. And sometimes that is better received from our people from them versus just being the kids minister. They know that I'm going to champion and ask for volunteers, but sometimes it is felt a little bit differently coming from them. And again, having their support from the very beginning, having a lot of them serve in kids ministry is an encouragement to our people, and they model it. And so it just makes it easier to follow.
Yep. And I can imagine that for parents who are new, who maybe are attending for a season or just kind of deciding if Mosaic is going to be their home church, for them to see other parents serving, I can imagine that it's sometimes that vision can be more caught than taught in a lot of ways of like, oh, there's a lot of parents who also have kids in kids ministry who are serving on a Sunday morning. And just this idea that you have like 4 separate teams who serve once a month, it just, I have maybe assume, or like maybe there's this cool thing happening where it just is an easy way to build community of serving alongside other parents who may have kids in the same season as you, or you're seeing a lot of parents serve. And so, I mean, oftentimes I drop my own kids off and I end up talking to the volunteer for another 5 minutes because they're a parent or they're a friend, or like I just have gotten to know these volunteers by just being a part of the church. And so, that's just one kind of like fun thing that you can kind of present if people listening are in this same situation of trying to get some more parents. Sometimes it's just personally asking a few of those parents to just say like, hey, can you just start serving consistently or once a month or whatever is doable for your church? And then you pray that kind of vision kind of seeps out of those parents who have made the choice to serve. And so, it's just a fun, unique way. And I just love how you have taken this and you've said, I'm going to have to be unique. We're going to have to think outside the box when it comes to our church, our service, our people, our kids. And I just think that's such a good reminder for people. And you said at the beginning of like, this may work, this may not work. And I think that's important for anybody listening of like, hey, these tips and tricks may work. The suitcases may work, but also they may not work, and that's okay. And so that's a good reminder. I would love for you to talk really quickly about this connection between parent discipleship and parents serving on Sunday morning. You've mentioned it a couple times, and I would hate to not hit on it of just how do you connect the dots? Because oftentimes, I think you mentioned it in an email to me of that sometimes there's this assumption that just because parents are serving on Sunday mornings and teaching kids in a classroom, that means that they're also participating in family discipleship at home. And sometimes those two are not connected. And so how do you guys work to connect the dots between encouraging your parents to serve on Sunday mornings, but also do family discipleship at home?
Yeah, it is something I'm passionate about, and it definitely poses a lot of challenge, like we have already talked about having parents serve, but we do believe it is very beneficial for them personally and in their own families, but even for us, and it makes the church overall better. And so first and foremost, we want to, like I said, cast vision, give the why behind the what, why we are doing what we are doing, even if it's individual elements of the schedule, why we're doing them, and what they can take from that. So that is first and foremost. We want to model for them also what it looks like to disciple kids. And so we want to be able to construct our schedules and our time and our content in a way that is easily transferable maybe to the home. And so there are a few unique ways we've done that for us. One was just making a connection between our liturgy as a whole church within service, and then also in Mosaic Kids. Hint, this is not my idea. We got this from some other people in a cohort. So there you go. You can take
that's exciting. That's fun.
Yeah. So just really quickly, and it's not exactly a 1-for-1, but we took these liturgical elements and we feel like they are matched in our worship gathering. So we say, God gathers his people. We pray to God. We listen to God's word. We respond to God, and God sends us on mission. And so obviously we have that, what we call big church or the worship gathering. God gathers his people. We come together. There's usually a welcome. We usually read scripture and we pray. Like, obviously there's prayer throughout service, but we pray to God. Then obviously the sermon is going to be preached. That's listening to God's word. We respond to God. For us, that is through communion on a Sunday morning, through worship after. We also have worship before, but we respond to God. And then God sends us on mission, and we have a benediction, and then we're sent out into Richardson, into our homes. And it's like in Mosaic Kids, our schedules, we want to match that. So it's not exactly, and it changes from class to class. But for example, in our preschool, we'd say like, so our class is 3 to 5. It's like God gathers his people, kids are checked in, dropped off. We want it to be welcoming, acknowledging that the Lord has had a purpose for each kid being there. We pray to God. So that's a time that is transitioned into our schedule where we review some of the months or things like that I'll hint on, and then get to pray. And then they have a large group lesson. And so they get to hear God's word. And then we respond to God. And the way we respond to God in our preschool schedule is by doing the gospel finger play, which is just a way to rehearse the gospel. We do review questions, and then we do a craft. And those are ways we can respond to God's word. And then sometimes there's a musical or worship element as well. So those are ways we respond. And then we have a benediction in Mosaic Kids of saying like, hey, may the Lord bless you as you be sent out back to your homes, back to your schools, whatever. And so that's just one way. And we hope that that's an easy model for parents to follow in their own family discipleship, family worship at home. They gather their family, pray, you listen to God's words, you're reading something, you respond to God. Probably easiest would be a worship song. And then like you can bless your kids and be like, hey, this is our time as family worship. Now let's go out. And do that work. So that's just one way we do that. And then the other thing I'll hint on is we have of the months. And so we have a memory verse of the month, a nation of the month, and a hymn of the month. And so we use all of those in Mosaic Kids. We talk about them. So we don't do all three every Sunday, but in our preschool, it's like the first Sunday we'll review our memory verse of the month, second nation, third hymn, and the fourth is just kind of left for either a review or whatever our focus is as a church this year. So this year we talked about prayer. And then in service, we, in like big church, if you will, for our elementary kiddos, they go to service with their parents for their like worship and then are dismissed before the sermon to go back for their large group and small group time. And so right before the sermon, we have what we call our mid-service dismissal kids moment. And so we use one of those elements to review. And it's a way for us to model for parents, how can you use the memory verse in your home? How can you use the nation of the month in your home? And so we have different people. It's not just me always leading it up front. I don't love being on stage. So I actually love having other people do it. And it's an opportunity for our parents or our congregation to see, like, it doesn't have to look like how Lexi would do it or how Lauren would do it. Here are some different ways you can do it based on different personalities, but here is something you can take and do in your household. So those are just kind of two kind of specific ways we try to create some overlap in continuity and create a way to model for parents how they can take what they've learned in Mosaic Kids or at Mosaic on a Sunday morning and transfer that into their own family discipleship at home.
Yeah, I love that. I love that so much. I love the consistency between adult worship gatherings and kids and how like when, especially because of your volunteer model of people only serving once a month, sometimes them jumping into kids once a month, it's like, oh, now I have to relearn all of this. But no, it's the same language and the same kind of order of service that they would experience in adults, but it's just for kids. And I just think that probably is so helpful for your teams, but also for, I mean, it's like probably helpful for the kids who, like you mentioned in the beginning, sometimes they go and sit with their parents. It's like seeing and hearing the same language is like, oh, it's one of those things that kids can sit in service with adults and be like, I know that. I've heard that. I feel a sense of belonging here because the language is the same. And I think that's so sweet. And I just loved how you have been intentional with that and then hopes that it will then transition into the home. And anytime we can give parents a model of what to follow for family discipleship is just so helpful. So I think that is such a sweet little tip at the end. Okay, so the last question we always ask is, if you were talking to someone brand new in kids ministry, what would be your words of encouragement or advice?
Wow, there's so much I could say here.
Yes.
So I will try to cover a few different things just because I think they're important. First and foremost, I would say pray. Like you have to, it seems really obvious and kind of maybe even overused in ministry, but it's so true. You have to pray. You have to pray for yourself, for your volunteers, for the people that you're supporting, obviously for the kids and families you're ministering to, but you just have to seek the Lord and pray. And kind of along those lines, you need to invest in your spiritual formation. So it can be really easy in kids ministry for you to never attend worship, and that is not okay. I will say that is hard for me whenever it's like there are things that need to be done here, but it's learning to trust to raise up and trust other people to lead in those spaces, and to prioritize that. That is still important for you. And I will say I have had the just greatest cheerleaders and encouragers from our other staff and elders to make it a priority for me to be in service, especially only having one service every Sunday. There has to be a time for me to prioritize that, and prioritizing Sabbath in your own life, whatever that looks like, rest for you. There are a million things you can do. You're not going to get everything done. That was words of wisdom from our pastor whenever I first launched. He was like, you're not going to be able to get everything done. Again, kind of our conversation earlier, like you have to plan and prepare properly, but there's going to be things that are left undone at the end of the week. That is the whole point of a Sabbath, right? We have to acknowledge our limitations. That's an opportunity for us to know that God does not have limits. He is limitless. And like, it's a way for us to trust him. And so not everything is going to get done. Plan and prepare as best you can, knowing that it's not going to be perfect, but the Lord is still good and kind and faithful to use even your frailty and limitations for his good and his glory. And then I would just say, listen with humility to parents, to volunteers. There is a lot of feedback in kids ministry, and it's not all bad. It is good. You have to have a thick skin, but and again, it's not always easy to hear the hard things, but if you have a humble heart coming into it, I think it can be really beneficial. One, people just want to be heard. And two, some people have some really good ideas. I would say some of our best ideas have come from our volunteers or lay leaders, or things like that. It's important to listen to them and hear what they have to say. Doesn't mean you have to take everything they say and do it. You need to sift through it. You are the one in charge, and you need to think about what works for y'all's context with your limitations, that is accomplishing your vision, mission, values, those types of things, but still listening to people is important. And with that, being present as much as you can with your volunteers, with kiddos, just for them to feel seen and known and valued is huge. And I would say ask for help, build a team, ask for help. You can't do it alone, and you shouldn't. It's not how it was intended to be. So work to gather a team of people, build strong leaders, and ask for help. And then have fun. Like, kids ministry is a joy. And so, yes, there are hard things, but it is really a joy to do, and a privilege and honor to get to shepherd little lives, and to come alongside parents and volunteers to model for them and train and equip them, and encourage them to do the same. And so don't get so bogged down in all the day-to-day challenges or to-do lists that you miss what the Lord is doing in and through your ministry, because it is huge, and he is working and moving. And so have fun with it, laugh, and have joy. So yeah, those are the things I would say.
Those are great. Thank you so much, Lexi. I'm so glad you were able to jump on the podcast today. We'll link to the Mosaic website. And does Mosaic have an Instagram?
We do.
Okay, so I'll link to those things so people can follow along and reach out to you if they want to learn more or hear more. But thank you. Thanks for being on the podcast. It was so fun having you. That was such a great conversation, and I'm so grateful to Lexi for sharing honestly and openly about what they do in their ministry and what works, and how they've changed things and shifted things and really created policies and procedures and the way that they cast vision that works for their church and their families. That's so important when you're leading a ministry, is getting ideas. So take ideas from what Lexi said and then really think about it and try and implement it into your ministry for what works for you and your families and your staff and all of those fun things. I also love that Lexi shared so many tips and tricks and so many pieces of wisdom for all of you church planting leaders. Church planting is no joke and can be so hard, but also I loved what she had to say about all the sweet moments of being in a church plant, helping a church plant launch. And it's just always so fun to hear both the good stories and the not so good stories. And so I hope that if you are in a church planting context or getting ready to plant a church, that you feel encouraged. You're not alone. A lot of the things that you're feeling, Lexi has felt, and I have also felt. And so we're just grateful that she was able to share with us today. All of the show notes that you need, all of the links that you need will be in our show notes. So don't forget to head over there and learn more about Mosaic. Reach out to Lexi if you want to connect with her. And don't forget, pre-register for our spring cohort coming in February 2024. You do not want to miss. As always, you can head over to Kids Ministry Circle on Instagram and Facebook to continue the conversation. Our Instagram handle is @Kids Ministry Circle. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.